It was another busy evening at the little restaurant on the corner of the main street. The soft buzz of conversation mixed with the clatter of plates and the smell of fresh bread. The place wasn't fancy, but it had a warmth that kept regulars coming back. In the middle of it all was a young waitress who moved quietly between tables, balancing trays and smiles. She had been working there for almost 2 years, keeping to herself and doing her job with steady hands and calm patience. Most customers never looked twice at her. She was just the kind, quiet waitress who made sure everyone had what they needed. What no one knew was that she hadn't always planned to be a waitress. There was a time not too long ago when her days were filled with music. She had studied piano since she was a child. Her mother used to sit by her side, gently correcting her fingers and smiling every time she played something right. Music was their world, their small escape from everything else. But life had a way of changing plans. Her mother's sudden illness had pulled her away from her dreams. When the bills started piling up, she had no choice but to work full-time. The piano keys had gathered dust, and her hands, once so used to dancing over melodies, now carried trays and wiped tables. That night seemed like every other, at least in the beginning. The regulars came in around the same time. Families, couples, and a few older men who liked to sit at the counter and talk to the cook. The laughter and chatter filled the space. The manager greeted customers at the door, his sleeves rolled up, always trying to make the small place feel like home. Then, a group of college students came in, loud and full of energy. They had that carefree attitude that comes with youth, teasing each other, taking selfies, and talking as if they owned the place. The waitress welcomed them with her usual soft tone and showed them to a table near the corner, close to the old upright piano that stood against the wall. That piano had been there longer than anyone could remember. Usually an older man played it on weekends, filling the room with familiar tunes, but he hadn't shown up that day. The piano sat silent, dusty, and slightly out of tune. The students noticed it right away. One of them laughed and said, "Hey, look, they've got an antique here." Another replied, "Yeah, but no one's using it. Maybe someone should play." Their laughter drew attention from nearby tables, and the waitress simply smiled, setting down their menus before walking away. As she passed behind the counter, she could still hear them talking. One of the boys said, "What if we ask her to play? She looks like the type who might know some old piano stuff." The others laughed. They weren't being kind. It was the sort of laugh that came before a joke meant to embarrass someone. The manager looked up from his register, catching the tone in their voices. But he stayed quiet. He trusted his waitress to handle herself. Still, he felt a small ache of worry. She was a gentle soul. He didn't like people making fun of her. The group waved her over again, pretending to be friendly. "Hey," one of them said, "do you know how to play the piano? We'll tip extra if you give us a show." His tone was half serious, half mocking, and the others smirked. She froze for a second, not sure how to respond. Her eyes moved to the piano, that old familiar shape that once felt like home but now seemed like a stranger. "Oh, I haven't played in years," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her heart skipped a beat. "Oh, come on," another teased. "It'll be fun. Just one song. We're bored. You look like you've got a hidden talent." The rest of them laughed again. It wasn't cruel yet, but it wasn't kind either. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no and walk away. But another part of her, the quiet one buried under long days and tired nights, remembered what it felt like to play. The weight of the keys, the sound that filled the room, her mother's smile. Maybe just for a moment she could touch that memory again. She looked toward the manager, who gave her a small, uncertain nod. He didn't want her to feel pressured, but he could see something in her eyes, a flicker of the old self she'd buried. "All right," she said quietly, almost surprising herself. "Just for a minute." The students cheered as if their prank had worked. They started recording on their phones, joking to each other under their breath. Some nearby diners turned to watch, curious. The waitress slowly walked toward the piano, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. Her fingers trembled a little as she lifted the cover and looked at the yellowed keys. She sat down on the small wooden bench. The seat creaked under her weight. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and let her fingers hover over the keys. Her heart was beating fast, not from fear of failure, but from something deeper, the feeling of standing again at the edge of an old dream. The restaurant grew quieter. Even those who didn't care much about the scene looked over. The sound of laughter faded. The pranksters whispered, waiting for her to mess up. The air felt thick with expectation. Her fingers pressed down on a single note. The sound was soft, almost hesitant. She paused, then added another. Slowly, a melody began to take shape, fragile, uncertain, but beautiful in its simplicity. Her touch was gentle, like someone tracing a long-forgotten path. The piano was slightly out of tune, but that didn't matter. The feeling was there. It was like watching someone wake up after a long sleep. The student stopped laughing. The one holding his phone lowered it slightly. The others exchanged quiet looks, realizing something they hadn't expected. This wasn't a joke anymore. As she played, her face softened. Her eyes focused on the keys, her shoulders relaxed, and a small smile touched her lips. The sound grew stronger, flowing through the room like a story told without words. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply remembering who she used to be. In that moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the laughter, the smell of food. It was just her and the piano. Her fingers moved faster now, confident and alive. Every note carried emotion, each chord a piece of her past. Some people in the restaurant stopped eating and listened quietly. Even the kitchen staff peeked through the small window in the door. The manager stood behind the counter, arms folded, watching her with quiet pride. He had seen her every day, polite and quiet, but he had never seen this side of her. This light in her eyes, this fire in her hands. The piece she played wasn't one anyone recognized. It was something of her own. Something she had composed years ago but never finished. She didn't plan to play it that night, but her heart had taken over. It was as if her mother's memory guided her hands, each note a conversation between the past and the present. By the time she reached the end, the room was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. The last note lingered in the air, soft and trembling. Then, as if waking from a dream, someone began to clap. The sound grew louder until the whole restaurant was applauding. The waitress blinked, surprised, her cheeks flushed. She hadn't expected that. For a moment, she just sat there looking at the piano, trying to catch her breath. The students who had started the prank looked embarrassed. The one who had dared her stepped forward and said quietly, "That was incredible. We're sorry. We didn't mean—" She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's all right," she said softly. Her tone wasn't angry. If anything, it was calm, forgiving. The manager walked up and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said with warmth in his voice. "You should have told me." She looked down at her hands, a bit shy. "It's been a long time," she replied. "I almost forgot how it felt." People came up to her table thanking her, saying how moved they were. One older woman said it reminded her of her own daughter who used to play. Another customer asked if she gave lessons. She laughed quietly and said no. She just used to love music. As the evening went on, she went back to work, but something inside her had changed. Her steps were lighter, her eyes brighter. Even when she carried trays or refilled glasses, she seemed different, like a small weight had lifted off her shoulders. Later, when the crowd thinned and the students had left, she returned to the piano. She sat down again, alone this time. The restaurant lights were dim, and the street outside was quiet. She played softly, just for herself. The music wasn't perfect, but it was honest, like a voice she had finally found again. The manager watched from the doorway, smiling quietly. He didn't interrupt. He just let her play. That night, she stayed a little longer after closing, cleaning up the tables and wiping the piano keys one last time. She touched them gently, like saying goodbye to an old friend she planned to visit again soon. Then she locked up, stepped into the cool night air, and walked home under the streetlights. Her heart felt warm, her steps unhurried. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a waitress ending a long shift. She was a musician again, maybe not on a big stage, but in a small way that mattered. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something she had thought she'd lost forever. The next morning, the little restaurant opened as usual. The early sunlight spilled across the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The waitress came in quietly, wearing the same simple uniform she always did, her hair tied neatly back. She looked like she always did on any morning shift, calm, polite, ready to work. But there was something different in her eyes. It was a small spark, like a quiet light that hadn't been there before. The manager noticed it right away. He smiled when she walked in, pretending to be busy counting receipts. "You made quite an impression last night," he said lightly. She looked surprised. "People are still talking about it. I got a few calls this morning. Customers asking when you're going to play again. She laughed softly, shaking her head. I wasn't planning on doing that again, she said. It was just for fun. Fun? The manager grinned. It looked like more than fun. You brought the whole place to a stop. That doesn't happen often. She smiled but didn't answer. Inside, she still felt unsure. Playing again had stirred something deep, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. For years, she had told herself it was too late, that her music was a part of her past. But after last night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way the piano felt under her fingers, the way the sound filled the room and the look on people's faces when she played. Later that morning, as she cleared tables and refilled cups, she overheard two regular customers talking at the counter. Did you see that waitress play the piano last night? One asked. My wife showed me the video. It was beautiful. She's got real talent, the other nodded. Yeah, I saw it online this morning. Someone posted it on social media. Already got a few thousand views. The waitress froze for a moment, then continued wiping the counter, pretending not to listen. A strange mix of emotions filled her chest. Embarrassment, pride, nervousness. She hadn't realized someone was recording the whole thing. She didn't even know her performance had gone beyond those four walls. When her break came, she stepped outside into the small alley behind the restaurant. The air was cool and quiet. She pulled out her phone and searched her name. Sure enough, the video was everywhere. The title read, Waitress plays piano like a pro after a customer's dare. She pressed play and watched herself sitting at that old piano, her hands trembling at first, then moving with confidence. The comments below were full of kind words. Beautiful. You can feel her emotion in every note. She should be on a stage. This made my day. She felt her heart race. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't asked for attention. But for the first time in a long while, people were seeing her for something more than a quiet waitress. The rest of the day went by in a blur. Customers kept mentioning it, asking questions, complimenting her. Some asked if she'd play again that evening. She smiled politely, saying she wasn't sure. Inside, she felt torn. She loved music, but she didn't want to become a spectacle. She didn't want to be remembered as a joke that turned into a lucky moment. By late afternoon, the same group of students from the night before walked in. The moment she saw them, her chest tightened. She half expected them to make fun of her again, but this time they were quiet. They looked different, less loud, more thoughtful. One of them approached her, holding a small bouquet of flowers. Hey, he said softly. We wanted to say sorry about last night. We didn't mean to embarrass you. It was supposed to be a dumb joke, but you were amazing. She looked at them for a moment, unsure what to say. Their sincerity was clear. Thank you, she said finally, her voice gentle. It's all right. Maybe it was meant to happen. They smiled with relief and left the flowers on the counter. We'll come by again to listen if you ever play, one said before they sat down. The manager saw the whole exchange. When she walked past him, he said quietly, You handled that with grace. She shrugged, brushing it off, but her eyes softened. As the evening approached, the restaurant grew busy again. People were whispering, waiting, glancing at the piano. The old instrument that had sat silent for months was suddenly the center of attention. The waitress avoided looking at it, focusing on her trays and orders. But deep down, she could feel something pulling her toward it. Every time she passed it, she wanted to sit down again. Finally, as the dinner rush began to slow, a little girl sitting with her parents near the window pointed at the piano and said, Can the lady play again? The child's innocent voice made the entire room smile. The parents apologized, but the waitress laughed softly. Maybe just for a little while, she said. She took off her apron, walked over to the piano, and sat down. The room quieted immediately. Even those who were just passing by the restaurant stopped near the window to see what was happening. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play a soft, familiar tune, one her mother used to hum while cooking. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just warm and peaceful. The sound filled the space, wrapping around everyone like a gentle breeze. This time she wasn't nervous. She didn't feel watched or judged. She simply played because it made her happy. The melody flowed like a conversation between her and the piano. When she finished, the applause wasn't wild, just heartfelt. People smiled, clapping softly. The little girl clapped the loudest, her face glowing with delight. Afterward, the manager walked over. "You've just become the best part of this restaurant," he said kindly. "That piano belongs to you now. Play whenever you want." She laughed and thanked him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was strange how life worked, how one embarrassing dare had turned into something beautiful. Later that night, as she cleaned up after closing, she sat by the piano again. The street outside was quiet, the chairs stacked, the lights dimmed. She let her fingers rest on the keys, playing softly to herself. This time she didn't think of the past or what could have been. She simply enjoyed the moment. The sound, the peace, the feeling of being whole again. As she played, the manager stepped out of his office. He didn't say anything, just stood there listening. When she finished, he said quietly, "You should think about doing something with that talent. Maybe perform on weekends or teach. People would love it." She smiled, unsure. "Maybe one day," she said. "For now, this is enough." But deep down, a small voice inside her whispered that maybe it was time to dream again. The next few days passed quickly. The video continued to spread online. Local newspapers picked it up, calling it a heartwarming moment and a surprise talent discovered in an ordinary place. Strangers came in just to see the restaurant where it happened. Some brought small gifts, others just wanted to say how touched they were by her story. Each day, more people asked her to play, and each time she did, the restaurant filled with smiles and applause. It wasn't about fame or attention for her. It was about rediscovering the part of herself she thought she'd lost. The music reminded her of her mother, of the dreams they once shared. Every time she played, she felt her mother's presence, gentle and proud. One afternoon, while she was serving lunch, a middle-aged man approached her table. He introduced himself as a music teacher from a nearby school. "I saw your video," he said kindly. "You have a gift. I'd like to help you if you're interested. Maybe we could talk about giving you some lessons again, or even performing at one of our community events." She was taken aback. No one had offered her something like that in years. "That's kind of you," she said softly. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." "Take your time," he replied with a reassuring smile. "But don't let that gift fade. Not everyone gets a second chance to share what they love." She thanked him and promised to think about it. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. Maybe this was her second chance. Maybe the world was giving her back what she once lost. Before leaving the restaurant, she stood by the piano, touching the keys gently. She whispered under her breath, "Maybe tomorrow." The next evening, when the restaurant filled with its usual crowd, she found herself walking to the piano again without anyone asking. The moment she sat down, the room quieted. She began to play a new melody, one full of hope and light like the sound of a sunrise. People stopped eating and turned their heads, drawn to her music. This time, the students from before were there too, sitting quietly at their table. They didn't record or laugh. They just listened, their expressions soft and respectful. When she finished, they clapped with everyone else, genuinely moved. After the crowd left, she stayed behind, cleaning and humming softly to herself. The manager came over and said, "You know, that prank might have been the best thing that ever happened here." She smiled. "Maybe the best thing that ever happened to me too," she replied. As she locked up that night, she looked back at the piano one last time. It was no longer just a piece of furniture in the corner. It was a reminder of how something cruel could turn into something beautiful, how a small moment of courage could change everything. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she felt ready to face it, with music in her heart and a quiet strength in her soul. The next morning began quietly. The sun shone through the windows of the restaurant, lighting up the wooden tables and empty chairs. The waitress arrived early as usual, her apron neatly tied, her hair pulled back. She moved around with her calm, practiced rhythm, setting everything in place before the first customer walked in. But her thoughts were far away. The sound of last night's applause still echoed in her mind, and the melody she had played kept repeating softly in her head. She didn't know why, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. As she filled the coffee pots and wiped the counter, the manager stepped out of his office with a newspaper in his hand. He smiled as he approached her. "You're in the paper," he said, placing it on the counter. Her eyes widened as she saw a small picture of herself sitting at the piano. The headline read, "Waitress captures hearts with her unexpected piano performance." She couldn't believe it. The story talked about the viral video, about how people were moved by her music. It even mentioned how something that started as a prank had turned into a moment that touched many lives. She looked up at the manager, still in shock. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said softly. He chuckled. "You'd be surprised how much people care when something real happens." "It's not every day the world gets to see a bit of heart." She blushed and shook her head. "I just played because they asked me to." "Sometimes that's all it takes," he said kindly. "A small moment can change everything." Throughout the morning, customers came in holding their phones, showing her the video, telling her how beautiful it was. Some even asked her to sign napkins or take pictures with them. She laughed, embarrassed but touched. It felt strange to be noticed. For so long she had been invisible, just another face in a crowded place. Now people were looking at her differently. By noon, the restaurant was packed again. A local reporter even stopped by to interview her. He asked simple questions about her life, her music, and how she felt about the sudden attention. She answered honestly, saying she never expected any of this. When he asked if she planned to play again, she smiled shyly. "Maybe," she said, "if people want to listen." That evening she played again, not because anyone asked, but because she wanted to. The piano had been cleaned, polished by the manager himself. The moment she sat down, the crowd quieted. She played a soft tune, one that spoke of gratitude and hope. It wasn't fancy or complicated, it was honest. The music flowed like a quiet river through the room, and when she finished, the applause felt even warmer than before. Among the crowd that night was the same music teacher who had spoken to her earlier in the week. After the performance, he waited for her near the counter. When she noticed him, he smiled. "You're even better in person," he said. "I'd really like to help you if you'll let me. We have a community recital coming up next month. Would you consider performing there?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she said softly. "I haven't played in public like that for a long time." "I understand," he said gently. "But think about it. You've already inspired so many people just by being yourself. Maybe this is your chance to take it a step further." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The applause, the kindness, the invitation. She wanted to say yes, but fear held her back. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if people expected too much from her? What if she failed? The next morning, she woke up early and decided to visit the small park at the edge of town before her shift. It was quiet there, just the sound of birds and the wind. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes, remembering her mother. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "When you play, don't think about who's listening. Just play for the music itself." That memory made her smile. Maybe she could do it. Not for fame or attention, but for herself. Later that day, when she arrived at the restaurant, the manager noticed the thoughtful look on her face. "Everything all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I think I'll do it," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "The recital?" "Yes," she said. "It's time I try again." He smiled proudly. "That's the spirit. You've got something special. Don't hide it anymore." The days that followed were busy, but in between shifts she practiced every chance she got. The restaurant became her rehearsal space after hours. The manager would lock the doors and let her stay as long as she wanted. Sometimes he'd sit at a table, listening quietly as she played. Sometimes she practiced alone, lost in her own world. Word spread quickly about the upcoming recital. Many of the regular customers promised to attend. Even the group of students who had started it all came by to wish her luck. They had changed a lot since that first night. They were genuinely supportive now. One of them said, "We're proud of you. You turned our stupid prank into something beautiful." She smiled, thankful for their honesty. When the day of the recital finally arrived, she was nervous. The small community hall was packed with people. Families, neighbors, local reporters, and even a few strangers who had come after seeing her video online. The lights were bright, the air filled with soft murmurs of excitement. She stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly. The music teacher found her there and gave her an encouraging nod. "You'll be fine," he said gently. "Just play from your heart. That's all anyone wants to hear." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The applause was warm but polite. She sat at the grand piano, taking a deep breath. For a moment, she just sat there staring at the keys, feeling the familiar mix of fear and longing. Then she began to play. The first few notes were quiet, delicate, almost like a whisper. The hall fell silent. Her fingers moved gracefully, her expression calm but full of feeling. The melody she played was one she had written herself, A piece about starting over, about finding light after darkness. Each note carried her story. The long nights, the struggles, the small victories, and the hope that had carried her through. By the middle of the performance, the music grew stronger, more powerful. It filled the room, washing over the audience. People could feel her emotion. Some wiped their eyes, others closed theirs, letting the sound carry them away. When she reached the final notes, her hands trembled slightly, but she finished with grace. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then suddenly the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. She sat there stunned, her eyes filling with tears. She had done it. All the fear, all the doubt, it was gone. The music teacher walked up to her afterwards, smiling. "I told you," he said. "You belong up there." The manager, who had come to watch from the back, clapped until his hands were sore. "That's my girl," he whispered proudly. After the show, people came to talk to her, to thank her, to tell her how much her music meant to them. A few parents even asked if she could teach their children. She felt overwhelmed but happy. It was as if a new door had opened in her life. That night, when she returned home, she sat by her small window and looked out at the quiet street. The world felt different now, not because she was famous, but because she had found herself again. She realized that her dream hadn't disappeared. It had just been waiting for her to return. In the days that followed, she kept working at the restaurant, but things weren't the same anymore. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was her friend, her voice. Every evening, people came to hear her play, and every time she did, she poured a little more of her heart into the music. The students who once laughed at her became regular visitors. Sometimes they brought their friends. The manager even started organizing small music nights at the restaurant, calling them Evenings of Hope. The first one drew a full house. The waitress sat at the piano, smiling as she began to play. She wasn't nervous anymore. She had learned that music had the power to heal, to change hearts, even to turn a cruel moment into something beautiful. As the music filled the room, she looked around at the faces, smiling, listening, feeling, and realized something. Her journey wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated, everyone who had given up on a dream. Her story reminded people that even the smallest spark could light up the darkest corner. When she finished that night, the applause was thunderous again. But what touched her most was not the sound of hands clapping. It was the look in people's eyes. They weren't just seeing a waitress anymore. They were seeing a musician, a survivor, someone who had found her strength again. She smiled, bowed slightly, and whispered a quiet thank you to the piano, to the audience, and to her mother's memory. Then she walked off stage, her heart full, knowing that this was only the beginning of a much bigger melody still waiting to be played. The restaurant was silent except for the sound of her fingers touching the keys. In that moment, it felt as if the whole world had paused to listen. The waitress didn't look up or notice the people around her. She was lost somewhere deep inside the music, in a place that felt safe and familiar. Her hands moved smoothly, and the sound that came from the old piano was rich and full of emotion. The same customers who were laughing minutes ago now stood still, their eyes fixed on her. The manager leaned on the counter, watching with disbelief. He had worked in that restaurant for years, seen hundreds of people come and go, but never something like this. The melody filled the air, soft at first, then rising with power and confidence. Every note told a story. Every pause seemed to carry a hidden memory. It wasn't just music. It was pain, joy, and hope all woven together in one beautiful sound. The pranksters who started it all were frozen in their seats. Their smiles had disappeared, replaced with looks of guilt and surprise. One of them tried to record, but his hand trembled too much to keep the camera steady. Another lowered his phone, realizing that capturing the moment on video couldn't match the feeling of being there. They didn't laugh anymore. They didn't whisper. They just watched. Outside the restaurant, people passing by heard the sound and peeked through the windows. The music drifted through the air like a story that begged to be heard. Even the cooks in the kitchen came out quietly, wiping their hands on their aprons, standing shoulder to shoulder at the doorway. The waitress didn't notice any of it. Her eyes were closed, her heart open, and the piano keys seemed to move with her emotions. Each note seemed to uncover something buried deep inside her, a memory of her mother singing. The feeling of sitting at the piano as a little girl, The promise she once made to never stop playing. She had broken that promise years ago, but tonight, without meaning to, she was keeping it again. It was as if her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. The melody changed, becoming faster, filled with energy and strength. The crowd could feel it too. Some people had tears in their eyes, though they didn't understand why. Others smiled softly, moved by the purity of the moment. The piano was old and slightly out of tune, but in her hands it sounded like something sacred. As she played, she didn't think about the prank or the laughter that started it. She didn't think about the bills waiting at home, the long shifts, or the tired feet. She only thought about the music and how good it felt to breathe again through sound. Her body relaxed. Her movements became more fluid, and she played as though the piano had been waiting for her all along. When the melody softened, a quiet sigh spread through the room. The customers held their breath, not wanting to interrupt the spell. The light from the ceiling reflected off the piano's wood, making her look almost like she was glowing. She reached the middle of her piece, where the emotion grew heavier, and her fingers trembled slightly before regaining control. It was the kind of music that made people feel something they couldn't name. The pranksters looked at one another, guilt spreading across their faces. One whispered, "We shouldn't have done this," and another nodded. They could see it clearly now. This wasn't a joke, it was someone's soul being shared in front of them. Their laughter had turned into silence, their mockery into admiration. They didn't deserve to be part of this moment, yet they were grateful to witness it. By the time she reached the final stretch, the sound of her playing had grown powerful and full of emotion. Each note hit the air like a heartbeat. The people in the restaurant didn't move. Some of them even forgot where they were. They felt something inside shift, a small reminder of how art can change a moment, how beauty can come from unexpected places. The manager wiped the corner of his eyes. He remembered how she once told him she used to study music before life forced her to take other jobs. He never asked what happened, but now he thought he knew. Maybe something painful, maybe something that broke her. But tonight, she was whole again. The song reached its final note, a long, soft, trembling sound that lingered in the air before fading into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The room was still, like everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Then, as if breaking from a trance, one person clapped softly. Another followed. And soon the entire restaurant erupted in applause. The sound filled the space, echoing off the walls. People stood up from their seats, clapping, cheering, smiling through tears. It wasn't polite applause, it was real, raw appreciation. The waitress looked up, confused at first. She had been so deep in the music she forgot anyone was there. When she saw everyone standing, her lips parted slightly and her eyes widened. She tried to smile, but emotion caught her. She covered her mouth for a second, trying not to cry. The manager joined in the clapping, his face glowing with pride. The pranksters, still standing near the front, clapped too, slowly, sincerely. They wanted to say something, but words didn't seem enough. The waitress stood from the piano bench and bowed slightly. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time in years, she had shared her heart with others, and they had understood it. The applause grew louder, and for a moment she let herself smile fully, a smile that reached her eyes. A few customers came forward, wanting to thank her or tell her how beautiful it was. One woman said she hadn't heard anything that moving in years. A man said it reminded him of his late wife. The waitress listened quietly, still trying to believe what had just happened. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. All her life, she worked in the background, serving, cleaning, taking orders. Tonight, people were seeing her for something more. The pranksters slowly approached. They looked ashamed, their heads slightly lowered. One of them finally spoke. "We didn't mean to make fun of you," he said softly. "It was stupid. I'm sorry." She looked at them for a long moment, then nodded gently. "It's okay," she said. "I used to play for people. I forgot how it felt." The sincerity in her voice hit them harder than any lecture could. They nodded back, grateful that she forgave them. They stood there for a moment, not knowing what else to say, then left quietly, still shaken by what they'd witnessed. The manager came over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got a gift," he said softly. "You should play more often." She smiled shyly and shook her head. "It's been a long time." "Well," he said, smiling, "maybe it's time to start again." The crowd began to leave slowly, still talking about the performance. Some people promised they'd come back next week just to hear her again. Others said they'd never forget that night. The restaurant, once filled with laughter and noise, now felt peaceful and warm. When the doors finally closed and the last customers left, the waitress sat alone at the piano again. The applause still echoed in her mind, but more than that, she felt something return, a quiet confidence, a small spark she thought she'd lost forever. She pressed one key softly, listening to the gentle sound fade into the empty room. Then she smiled, whispered a thank you to the memory of her mother, and turned off the lights. Outside, the night was calm. The moonlight reflected off the windows, and the faint sound of the city blended with the wind. Somewhere, far from the noise of the world, a woman had just rediscovered herself. What began as a cruel prank had turned into something unforgettable, a moment of truth, beauty, and grace. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the restaurant's windows, painting golden lines across the empty tables. The waitress arrived early, as she always did, her apron neatly folded under her arm. But this time something felt different. She wasn't just walking into another shift. The memory of last night still echoed in her heart, the sound of applause, the smiling faces, the feeling of being seen for the first time in years. The piano sat quietly in the corner, the same one that had stood unnoticed for so long. It looked different now, almost alive, like it remembered too. She ran her fingers over the keys, feeling the smooth surface, and smiled softly. The keys were slightly chipped, and the wood had scratches from years of use, but it had been her bridge back to something she thought she had lost. The manager came out from the back carrying a box of fresh supplies. He stopped when he saw her standing by the piano. "Couldn't stay away from it, huh?" he said, smiling. She turned toward him, a little embarrassed, and shrugged. "I guess not." He set the box down and leaned on the counter. "You know, people haven't stopped talking about you since last night. We've already had calls asking if you're playing again this weekend." She laughed softly, not sure how to respond. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen," she said. "It just sort of did." The manager nodded. "That's how the best things happen." He paused, studying her expression. "You've got something special. Don't hide it again." As the day went on, customers started coming in, and word about the waitress who played the piano spread faster than anyone expected. People who had never set foot in the restaurant before were now calling to reserve tables. Some brought flowers. Others just wanted to see her. She felt nervous but touched. It was strange. After years of being invisible, she suddenly mattered to people. Later that afternoon, as she cleared tables, a small group of college students walked in. It was the same group from the night before, the pranksters. They looked different now, quieter, almost humble. The waitress saw them and froze for a moment. Part of her didn't know what to feel. But when she saw their nervous faces, she decided to walk over. They stood up when she approached. One of them, the one who had led the prank, spoke first. His voice was softer this time. "We wanted to say we're really sorry. We thought it would be funny, but we were wrong." "You didn't deserve that." The waitress looked at them for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You already said sorry last night," she said. "And you stayed and listened." That was enough. They looked relieved. Another one spoke up. "You were amazing. Like, really amazing. We didn't know you could play like that." She smiled gently. "Neither did I," she said honestly. It had been a long time. They exchanged a few more words, then left quietly, leaving a small bouquet of flowers on one of the tables with a note that simply said, "Thank you for the music." The gesture touched her deeply. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about understanding. By evening, the restaurant was full again. The atmosphere felt electric. People kept glancing at the piano, whispering and waiting. The manager gave her an encouraging nod. "Only if you want to," he said. She hesitated. Her heart beat fast, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't sure if she could capture the same feeling as last night, but something inside told her this was the moment to trust herself again. She sat at the piano, the crowd quieting immediately. This time she didn't play a classical piece. She played something different, something of her own. It started softly, just a few gentle notes, then grew into a melody that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. People leaned in, enchanted. The sound filled the air, warm and full of life. As she played, she thought about all the things that brought her here. The hard days, the cruel prank, the rediscovery of her old self. Every note carried gratitude. Every pause was a breath of healing. The crowd was silent, completely drawn into the music. Even those who didn't understand anything about piano could feel what she was saying without words. When she finished, the room erupted again in applause. But this time she didn't feel surprised. She smiled with quiet confidence, bowing her head slightly. The joy in the room was shared, not just for her talent, but for the story behind it. People saw more than just a waitress now. They saw a dream that had come back to life. After her performance, several people came up to her. One was an older man who introduced himself as a music teacher from a nearby university. He told her he had been in the restaurant by chance the night before and was deeply moved by what he heard. "You have a gift," he said. "If you ever want to study again, I can help you." She was stunned. The idea of returning to music school was something she had buried long ago, but hearing those words made her heart race with excitement and fear. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "It's been so long," the man smiled. "It's never too late. What matters is that you still have the music in you." He handed her his card and left, leaving her speechless. The manager grinned when he saw her expression. "Looks like the world is opening its doors for you again," he said. She laughed softly, feeling shy but hopeful. That night, as she walked home, the cool air brushed against her face. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. She carried the card in her pocket, feeling its edges between her fingers. The idea of starting over scared her, but the thought of never trying scared her even more. When she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. The glow reminded her of the piano keys under the restaurant lights. She closed her eyes and could almost hear the applause again. But more than that, she felt peace, a kind she hadn't felt in years. The next few days were filled with changes. The story of her performance spread quickly. Someone's video of her playing had gone viral online. Thousands of people watched, commented, and shared her story. They called her the Waitress pianist and praised her for her courage and talent. Messages poured in from strangers around the world, saying how her music touched their hearts. At first, she was overwhelmed. It was strange to think that so many people were talking about her. But as she read some of the messages, she felt deeply moved. One message said, "You reminded me to chase my dream again." Another said, "Your music made me cry. Thank you for showing that it's never too late." She realized that what happened wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who ever gave up on something they loved. Her story gave them a small spark of hope. The manager supported her through it all. He told her that whatever she decided to do, she'd always have a place at the restaurant. But he also said something that stayed with her. Sometimes life pushes us off track so we can find our way back stronger. She spent her break sitting at the piano, practicing quietly, letting her fingers remember old pieces and create new ones. Customers often stopped to listen, and every time she played, the restaurant seemed to fill with warmth. One evening, the same college students returned again, this time bringing their families. They sat quietly, listening as she played a gentle tune. Afterward, they came up to her and thanked her again, not just for the music, but for forgiving them. One of them said, "You taught us something we'll never forget. That kindness is stronger than pride." She smiled softly, touched by their words. It was strange how one act meant to humiliate her had turned into something beautiful that connected people. Life had a funny way of turning pain into purpose. As weeks passed, her confidence grew. She started performing every weekend at the restaurant. People from nearby towns came just to see her. Local newspapers wrote small stories about her journey. The same piano that once collected dust now stood proudly as the heart of the place. Sometimes, when she looked around at the smiling faces of the customers, she remembered that first night, how afraid she was, how unprepared she felt. And now she stood in the same place, no longer afraid, no longer hiding. The prank that once felt cruel had become the turning point of her life. It brought her back to herself. It showed her that people can change, that forgiveness can heal, and that dreams, no matter how long they sleep, can always wake again. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to find out. And as the night ended and the last customer left, she sat once more at the piano, playing a quiet melody for herself, a song of peace, of second chances, and of the magic that happens when courage meets opportunity. Weeks turned into months, and the restaurant slowly became a place known not just for its food but for its music. Every weekend, people filled the tables not because they wanted to eat, but because they wanted to listen. The waitress's story had spread far beyond the small town. Newspapers had written about her, and videos of her performances kept circulating online. Yet she remained humble, still greeting customers with the same soft smile, still serving tables during the day. Every time she sat down at the piano, she felt something new. The fear that used to sit in her chest had faded. Now all she felt was warmth and connection. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played to speak without words, and people listened in a way that made her believe the world still had room for small, honest beauty. The manager often stood by the counter during her performances, watching with pride. He would sometimes whisper to customers about how it all began, about how what was meant to be a cruel prank turned into something no one could have predicted. The story never failed to touch people's hearts. One Friday evening, the restaurant was especially busy. The air buzzed with excitement. A few customers whispered that someone from a well-known music company had come to watch her perform. She didn't know about it until later. All she knew was that when she touched the keys that night, she played with more heart than ever before. She played a new piece she had been quietly working on at home, something that told her story without needing any words. It started soft, almost fragile, like the first step after falling. Then it built strength, moving with rhythm and confidence filled with both sadness and hope. The sound carried through the room, reaching everyone who listened. A few people closed their eyes. Some smiled through tears. Others held their hands together, afraid to break the moment. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was deep and meaningful, a silence that said everything applause could not. Then the room erupted. The crowd stood, clapping, cheering, calling her name. She stood up, overwhelmed but glowing, her heart full. For her, every clap was more than applause. It was healing. It was proof that what she loved still had a place in the world. After the performance, a man approached her. He introduced himself as a representative from a local arts foundation. He had seen the video online but wanted to see her play in person. "Your music has touched a lot of people," he said. "We'd like to invite you to perform at our annual music gala next month." She froze, unsure if she heard him right. Her hands tightened around the edge of her apron. "Me? I'm not a professional anymore," she said. The man smiled kindly. "Maybe not on paper, but what you did tonight, that's what real music is about." She didn't give an answer right away. She needed time to think. That night, as she walked home under the streetlights, she kept hearing his words. She thought about her mother, about all the times they played together, and about how she stopped after losing her. Maybe it was time to play again, not out of pain, but out of love. Over the next few weeks, she practiced after closing hours. The manager would lock the doors and stay behind, wiping down counters while she played. Sometimes he'd hum along quietly. Other times he'd just listen, smiling to himself. She wasn't practicing for perfection. She was preparing to tell her story one last time on a bigger stage. The night of the gala arrived. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and hundreds of eyes were on her. For a second she felt that old fear return, the fear of not being enough. But then she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and thought of the little restaurant, the laughter that turned into applause, and the kindness that followed. The first notes came quietly, echoing through the hall like whispers. Slowly the melody grew. She played not for fame or approval, but for the memory of her mother and the younger version of herself who once dreamed so fearlessly. The sound was honest, unpolished, and beautiful. It carried the weight of every struggle, every moment of doubt, and every bit of joy she had rediscovered. When she finished, the crowd rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing around the room. She stood still, almost in disbelief. It was happening again. That same warmth spreading through her, that same feeling of being seen. She bowed, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from sadness but from gratitude. Afterward, people came up to meet her. Some wanted photos, others just wanted to thank her. One elderly woman said, "You reminded me of my daughter who used to play. Thank you for bringing back a memory I thought I lost." Those words stayed with her more than anything else that night. Back at the restaurant the next day, the manager and staff greeted her with flowers and cheers. Someone had brought a newspaper that already had her photo from the gala with the headline, "Waitress wins hearts with piano performance." She laughed shyly, shaking her head. "It still feels like a dream," she said. "It's not a dream," the manager replied. "It's your second chance." From that day on, she continued working at the restaurant, but now she played regularly at local events too. Schools, charity programs, even small concerts invited her. She always said yes. Not because she wanted recognition, but because every time she played, she felt connected to people, to music, to life itself. The prank that started it all became a story people shared often, not because of the cruelty behind it, but because of what it led to. It reminded people that sometimes the worst moments can turn into something beautiful if met with grace. The students who once mocked her even became her biggest supporters. They volunteered to help at her shows, saying it was their way of giving back. Months later, one of them came to visit the restaurant alone. He had started learning piano after that night. He told her, "You made me realize how powerful music can be." She smiled, guiding him through a few simple chords before returning to her tables. "Keep practicing," she said. "It's not about how good you get, it's about what you feel when you play." In time, her story reached even more people. But through it all, she stayed grounded. The restaurant remained her favorite place, not for fame, but because it was where everything began. The piano, once dusty and forgotten, now stood polished and bright near the window. A small plaque was placed on it by the manager. It read, "To the waitress who reminded us what real music sounds like." Sometimes, after closing time, she would sit alone at the piano. The lights would be dim, the chairs empty, and the smell of freshly cleaned tables in the air. She'd play softly just for herself. The notes would fill the quiet room, and she'd feel her mother's presence beside her, smiling in approval. She had learned something priceless, that beauty can rise from the most unexpected places, and that kindness, even in response to cruelty, has the power to transform hearts. The prank that was meant to humiliate her ended up restoring not only her faith in herself, but also the hearts of everyone who witnessed her courage. Years later, people still talked about that night, the waitress, the piano, the standing ovation. Some remembered the music, others remembered the lesson. But to her, it was simpler than that. It was just life with all its strange twists and turns, leading her back to the thing she loved most. And so, whenever someone asked her about it, she always said the same thing, with a smile that carried both peace and pride. "It started as a prank, but it became my song."